Nerdrotic.com.
Welcome, you over 833,000 practitioners of common sense and the 40% who haven't subscribed yet. Let's talk about the strike again. It's been 105 days since the strike began at time of recording, and the good news is there hasn't been any late-night talk show hosts polluting YouTube. The better news is there hasn't been any simpleton adult pretenders assaulting our senses with their stupidity. The bad news, for Hollywood anyway, and the WGA and the SAGs, is there is a backlog of adult pretender stupidity that will last us content creators a year.
That it's no longer 1937. That is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
I take responsibility.
The cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated.
There's a lot of ways to lose your house. Some of it is financial, some of it is karma.
I take responsibility.
And Justin and I wrote a Star Wars movie together. Yeah, we did. Picketing Disney is more fun.
Oh, it's a delight.
I take responsibility.
If I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
Right.
There's worse news for Hollywood. The previous writer's strike was over at this point, and this one has no end in sight. The other big difference, back in 2007, 2008, people actually cared, and for this strike, they don't. But what about Barbenheimer? And that will be a very good question. Both Barbie and Oppenheimer are massive successes and have turned it around for the movie theaters and given Hollywood a box office run that they haven't seen for years, and thanks to the unfortunate timing of the strike, won't see for years. Add to that the massive flops, Disney is falling apart, and streaming services regularly losing hundreds of millions of dollars per quarter, including but not limited to Disney Plus, which lost over $500 million last quarter, Peacock, which lost over $500 million last quarter, and Paramount Plus, which lost over $500 million last quarter. And Paramount Plus has one of the more successful franchises on streaming. No, not Star Trek, the Sheridanverse. Now that Tinseltown is experiencing this existential and financial crisis, it's led them to do something they've been putting off for a long time. Some introspection and retrospection. Maybe now they realize that they are not only on the verge of failing, they have been failing, and more importantly, they are coming to terms with the fact that they need to let things fail. Now that Hollywood is discussing things openly, has this led to a fearless and searching moral inventory, seeking out the exact nature of their wrongs? I wish that were the case. No, they're hitting the panic button because they're going broke. This is a bit of a follow-up to my last strike video, which was a follow-up to the previous strike video, and I'm sure there'll be more. But you've heard from me. Let's hear from the people working in the industry and also observe the massive blind spot they still have. We could start with the coming cinema apocalypse is here. It's my kind of title, but I found one that's even better. Death Spiral of Hollywood Monopolies. Too big to fail? Not so fast. A showrunner's cautionary memo. I just want to point out that in both of these articles, one written by a Hollywood producer, the other written by a Hollywood showrunner, they're using terms like death spiral and cinema apocalypse. Remember when YouTubers used terms like that? Okay, I'll be real. I'm going to use a term like that for this video. And it was considered hyperbole? Guess not so much anymore. This one is written by Elena Smith. She is the creator and showrunner of Apple TV's Dickinson. No, I've never heard of it. Hollywood is broken. I like the sound of that one too. More than $500 billion have been wiped off the market value of the world's biggest media companies this year. Oh no. While on the streets, hundreds of thousands of writers and actors, which might be your problem, are on strike, bringing the industry to a grinding halt at the moment when it most needs to prove its resilience. Now be careful, Elena, that could be interpreted as questioning the timing of the strike, and we all know that your unions don't like to be questioned. Just ask Stephen Amell, who called the Film Actors Guild strike reductive and then was forced to take the walk of shame. Let's see where she goes with this, as the oddly mismatched mega companies who currently produce, own, and distribute TV shows and movies fumble to align themselves on basic issues like minimum compensation and worker protection, along with the looming technology shifts of AI, it has become clear that the only goal these corporations have in common is to gain market power and then exploit it. That is to monopolize. This monopoly power, once grabbed, is used to lower costs and hedge risk for Wall Street investors. Well, she's not wrong, primarily by reducing or eliminating the bargaining leverage of artists and independent producers, by continuing to consolidate or vertically integrate along different and conflicting lines lines of the business and by raising prices for the consumer, all while the entertainment they sell continues to decline in cultural relevance. Again, Elena is not wrong, and this decline is going to continue, and I would go so far as to say Hollywood is in a doom loop. Once again, though, I think it would be prudent to point out that this is a doom loop created by the producers and writers of Hollywood. I didn't hear any writers complaining back in 2018 and 2019 when producers were passing out those first look deals like Coke at an Oscars after party, including but not limited to Ryan Murphy, creator of Glee, getting a $300 million first look deal from Netflix.
And I thought, wow.
Or director of the flop A Wrinkle in Time, Ava DuVernay, getting $100 million from Warner Brothers. A deal Warner Brothers terminated recently, but I'm sure it had nothing to do with the strike. Or Hollywood's favorite insufferable feminist Phoebe Waller-Bridge getting $60 million from Amazon. Or Dan and Dave, Dumb and Dumber from Game of Thrones, getting $200 million from Netflix. And last and very least, the king repurposer and co-destroyer of Star Trek and Star Wars, Jar Jar Abrams, was given $250 million by Warner Brothers. And most of the people I just mentioned since signing those contracts have produced next to nothing. Let's see what the solution is. Without regulation, no, and we'll get to that, of these monopolies, Hollywood will succumb to a death spiral, planting a stake in the heart of the entertainment industry, one of America's most lucrative exports, whose stories and stars have defined our culture for the past century or more. As far as regulation is concerned, even with the laws that are on the books now, there's not a single politician that will do anything about it because they're the ones who ushered in this era, and I would like to point out, these are politicians that Hollywood largely supported. As far as new regulation is concerned, because I know that's what you're talking about, hell no, I don't want a single taxpayer penny spent on you fixing your dying industry. The best regulation is to let it fail. The monopolistic streaming system, as it turns out, works for nobody in Hollywood. Well, not anymore. Not the execs, not the shareholders, and wait for it, not the audience. I was wondering when you were going to bring us up, because we are part of that massive blind spot that every creative, every executive, and every member of the Access Media has in Tinseltown, and something that neither of these articles brings up. It's primarily why I came to YouTube and channels like mine exist. There is no way in hell you guys haven't even considered the possibility that alienating half of the voting population of this country might not have dire financial consequences. More on that later. Then Elena goes over the history of the streaming wars, which I've done quite a bit on this channel, calling it the great disruption of television and film, which is exactly what it was, but she tries to push the narrative that Hollywood was duped into this when they knew exactly what they were doing. The only ones I believe were duped were shareholders and investors. Silicon Valley's Hollywood offered Wall Street something that Hollywood could never offer before: massive potential profits from streaming services and a steady revenue stream. Unfortunately, it turned out to all be a lie. Artists too were bamboozled by Netflix's sexy new model of overpaying everyone upfront in order to exclusively control the back end. Well, I don't know if Hollywood is known for controlling the back end, and keep any quantifiable audience response hidden globally forever. And once Netflix made this model the new normal, other companies followed suit. So you admit that you, possibly, and other creatives have accepted overpay upfront, knowing that you wouldn't get anything from the back end. Well, that's called you get what you negotiate. But by all means, negotiate a performance-based contract. That should solve that problem, right? Of course, you're not going to do that because that's not really what you want, according to a WGA negotiator.
Our residuals, they're not as good as they were. But there's also just larger issues that are sort of more widespread than just the residual issue, because even what the writers used to get paid up front, if a writer writes something that ends up earning a lot of money for its producer, the studio, that writer deserved a portion of that, and that money was paid up front.
Now there are no more Nielsen ratings. That's partially true. None that tell us the whole story. No more box office numbers. There's plenty of box office numbers, although we all know all of these numbers are fudged. No more publicly available feedback loop of any kind to reveal to anyone, artists, executives, audiences, or critics which of the ever-mounting heap of shows or movies were actually being watched and enjoyed. Oh, honey, there's been a feedback loop from the audience, one that you have either ignored or vilified us for. Elena, the author of this article, showed Dickinson was one of just 4 series to launch Apple's global streaming service in 2019, and to this day I have no earthly clue how many people have seen it, nor what value my near decade of creative labor generated for the company. Not only do I have no metrics for my own success, I don't even know how Apple would determine those metrics in the first place. Again, I'm gonna call bullshit on this. Every streaming service knows exactly how each show performs down to the second. And this is something maybe you could have negotiated before you signed a contract with Apple. Did either you or your agent not ask this question beforehand? But to back her up on those streaming numbers, it is true. Very few people know exactly what they are because they're low. If they were exceeding expectations, Netflix, Apple, Paramount Plus, Peacock, and Disney Plus would be screaming them from the rooftops. Seems, sadly for woke Hollywood and far too late, reality is setting in. So we've reached the final episode of the limited series. The streaming bubble has burst. The story is a scam. Then she goes on to quote David Zaslav, of all people, the most popular person in woke Hollywood. I kind of like him. Let's face it, the strategy to collapse all windows, starve linear TV and theatrical, and spend money with abandon while making a fraction in return, all in the service of growing sub numbers, has ultimately proven to be deeply flawed. I'd also like to add that another aspect of your industry that's deeply flawed is your fan-baiting marketing departments and your gaslighting adult pretenders. She also mentions that the only audience that matters is Wall Street, and while that is true, don't act like you ever gave a shit about the paying customer, and the only potential star is the platform itself. And who does Hollywood have to thank for that? You got it, themselves. Tough times for woke Hollywood, and you just hate to see it. This brings us briefly to our next article with a headline that sounds like a title to one of my videos, and it may be, except it's written by the producer of Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Ted Hope. The coming cinema apocalypse is here. Telltale signs that it may get far worse before it gets a wee bit better. Now, Ted points out 51 reasons why the great Hollywood apocalypse is here. We're just going to go over a few. Possible proof the cinema apocalypse is upon us. We are controlled by surveillance capitalism. Wrong. We're controlled by surveillance. I can't call it a technocracy. How about a tech idiocracy? One that Hollywood helped build and fortify. The information age is over. The value of information has been destroyed. There is no reliable source of truth. Well, whose fault is that? Again, that lays at the feet of your corporate overlords in Silicon Valley, in Hollywood, and in Washington. Twitter just recently exposed that members of our alphabet agencies were working at Twitter to suppress our free speech. You don't think that's going on in every other corporation that provides information? We no longer have a counterculture or anything that can be the necessary cultural course corrector. Unfortunately, the counterculture that used to be artists in the film industry, the publishing industry, the comic book industry, and the music industry, just to name a few, became firm supporters of the system and cancel culture. We're still out here, but Hollywood is far too busy demonizing it rather than recognizing it. I've been saying this for years. Many in the industry have conjectured that the streaming ecosystem may eventually shrink to 4 major platforms. If that's the case, then we'd sacrifice cable only to replace it with a broadcast-style monopoly. And here's another thing many of us have been saying for quite some time. Despite a good weekend from Barbie and Nolan, the theatrical market is still shrinking. The market is down 16% from its 2018 peak. Ticket prices are up, and revenues are still down. That's because audience is way down. Way, 25%. When the beast ate everything else, Marvel seems to be mortally wounded, and the overlords seem clueless of what to fill the vacuum with. Is the clock ticking faster? Yes. And this thing goes on and on. He states quality of work is declining. Yeah, no shit. And they have no clue how to be talent friendly. And I would like to add to that, the talent has no clue how to be audience friendly. You get the point. Things in Hollywood are fucked. And back to Elena's article, Hollywood Monopolies Death Spiral. here again is her big solution. Here's what we can do. We need a political coalition, hell no, to break up the studio streamers, or we will lose the ability to sustain the TV and film industry that has been the beating heart of our culture for over 100 years. And the floodgates are open. Zachary Levi calls out Hollywood garbage, urges moviegoers not to watch crappy films. Studios don't care enough to actually make it great, like the recent DC films. I can't believe we have 2 more to go. One flop with Blue Beetle and one plop with Aquaman 2. And director Charlie Kaufman essentially said the same thing as Zach. Charlie Kaufman criticizes Hollywood for putting out garbage as seductive, cynical sales pitches. And now Hollywood striking writers are running out of money. So both articles brought up some pretty legitimate reasons that led up to this current woke Hollywood crisis, but the blind spot remains, although Ted Hope got the closest. As far as that movie-going audience being way down to the tune of 25% from the 2018 peak, well, I guess it's got something to do with alienating and attacking the paying customer, subverting beloved franchises while shitting on the source material, during COVID, shaming people for wanting to go to work while being able to freely professionally pretend, exacerbating the division in this country while rooting on the summer of love, producers like Jar Jar Abrams' company Bad Reboot saying things like enough white comfort, all while not having a single problem with one of Hollywood's biggest studios, Disney, becoming outright anti-family, shrinking Finn on the Force Awakens poster for China, covering up the late Chadwick Boseman's face on the Black Panther poster for China, and of course, thanking a concentration camp in China. And if you're looking for sympathy from the paying customer, well, I think the response to this tweet sums it up. After nearly 100 days on strike, Hollywood writers are taking financial hits, uncertain when they'll have a steady flow of income again. I'm feeling like I'm subsidizing this strike with my savings in a way that's starting to get scary. From oil field rando, oh neat. Kind of like the time me and all my friends were getting laid off from the oil field because they shut down the world and Hollywood just kept saying, stay home and save lives. And we tried to find work for months on end. Then there's this little problem. YouTube does not respect the writer's strike. This could be a big problem for TV. Now, I personally could care less what big YouTubers think of the writer's strike, but this tidbit of information is very interesting, and many of us saw this coming. The money pipeline that funded the TV shows that striking writers worked on is now increasingly headed to YouTube instead, because this is the most ad-friendly platform out there. That's not the only way YouTube is becoming television. Almost half of US YouTube viewing now happens on TVs rather than phones or desktops. In fact, research agency Neil's flagship Gauge chart now has YouTube as the single biggest channel in the US. Bottom line, you pissed off a lot of people, you bored a lot of people to tears, you're losing a generation, and a lot of us just found other things to do. If you think about it, we're not just talking about a TV show, a movie, a franchise, or a studio. We're talking about an entire industry. Hollywood got woke and went broke. So Hollywood, while you're all on strike looking for that mythical job security in an industry that is currently burning and could never provide any, I want you to keep a couple of things in mind. Aside from Disney, which can completely go out of business, and I think the world would be better for it, I would like to see Hollywood improve, but you need to remember you are a luxury item that requires disposable income from a very comfortable population. As it stands right now, it looks like the best path to improvement would be to hit bottom and fail. Let the Hollywood apocalypse happen, and we'll see what happens. But don't worry about us. Take your time. We'll be over here entertaining ourselves. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, I thank you for listening this long. I will see you in the next video.
Nerdrotic.com.